Hello, everyone. I am Sarthak Kaul, and this is True Calling. Our guest today is Ahmed Mirza. He is an investor at Techstars, which is one of the leading startup accelerators in the world. Ahmed has worn multiple hats in his career, starting off in investment management, then dropping off to become an entrepreneur, where he started three companies. From there on, he worked in venture studios, Wavemaker Labs, and Pilot44. So we talked about his passion for helping founders actualize their potential, being a connector of ideas and people as a community builder, and his own journey of figuring out his identity, being born in the US, but growing up and being raised with Eastern values. I hope you all enjoy this conversation, and if you get value from the topics we discussed, subscribe to wherever you're watching this. Much love. See you next time. So I think first thing that I wanted to understand more was just your background. Tell me a little bit about your family. I'm curious
Yeah,
to hear more about that.
yeah, sure. I was, as I like to say, born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and then domesticated in New York City in Manhattan. My parents, they came here as immigrants to the States. They came in the 80s. My from Pakistan, so spent a lot of time. They were born and raised there, and then obviously came over to the States. Historically, my family is from, I guess you'd say India, Delhi, India, and during partition, obviously they went over to Pakistan. Um, so I, as most immigrants in the U.S., I kind of had a dual upbringing. So one that was given to me by my parents, one that I was trying to figure out here in the States, and went about school, went about everything else, tried to get good grades, sometimes did well, sometimes did poorly. And then I went to school, university in New York City, went to NYU and graduated and sort of got caught up in the whole finance world. So I started my career in equity research, joined Merrill Lynch. So was responsible for writing sell side research. So basically really long reports that institutional investors would read so that they can then go invest. Transitioned, eventually went to investment banking. So I helped sell large companies in the tech sector to even larger companies. And I'd say that that first third of my career was more or less very analytical, very hands-on, trying to understand what works in the public markets, what doesn't. And then I transitioned and went down the entrepreneurial route. And I think part of this was driven just by my upbringing. My dad had multiple businesses growing up, and he was always in front of customers, talking to people. And that's sort of, what I did too a little bit when I was growing up. So then I launched a few ventures, became an entrepreneur, no big exits just yet. And then, yeah, came to the world of venture capital. And that's sort of where I sit now.
Okay, a lot of different threads to pull there. So let's go back to when you're kind of growing up in this dual household in some ways, having an American identity, being born here, but also, Pakistani. Um, was there ever a time growing up where you felt that you didn't know where you belonged?
Yeah. I think this is a common thread in a lot of first, second, and third generation residents in the United States is that you kind of have a dual personality. At times, so I think I felt it very much in high school. I didn't feel it pretty much up until that point. But in high school, kids start hanging out, they start going to parties, they start doing different things. And one aspect to me is, I don't drink, right? I don't drink alcohol. I don't sort of engage in any of those activities. And at high school, um, that was really difficult, right? So I couldn't go to parties, I couldn't hang out with the cool kids, and I was left stuck feeling sort of not being popular enough or cool enough to hang out with everyone else. But then at the same time, I had this American identity where I didn't sound like, you know, my cousins or the people that I would interact with back from the motherland. So yeah, it was very trippy. And I think it took me a long time to come to terms with that dual personality. And, now I'm just one person, right? But I think for a very long time, there were two parts of me that I tried to balance and juggle, and that led to a lot of heart, led to a lot of mental health struggles. But yeah, I've since come to terms with it.
How did you reconcile that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think everyone has a different path. For me, I was never really close to my religion or my faith. I think my faith sort of helped me bridge the gap between the two. I also kind of just started just being myself. And so instead of pretending to be someone in different scenarios or different situations, I just started to say, "Hey, I'm Ahmed, and this is who I am." And I think that helped a lot. It began the reconciliation process. For me, it was just realizing that I am who I am, and I'd much rather be a transparent book as opposed to sort of being two different types of people.
Did you have people around you, maybe your friends or someone that you looked up to during that time?
Yeah, I think that's probably like one of the things that I lacked was I didn't have a person that I looked up to or a mentor that I said, "Hey, how do you go about doing this?" And I think part of it is when I was in the thick of things. So my dad came here in the mid 70s. My mom came here in the 80s. So I was part of the first sort of generation of kids being raised and going to college here and whatnot. So I didn't have I didn't know the know-how of how to reach out to a mentor. But I think what my parents did really well was that their group of friends that came here in the 70s and 80s all then ended up living very close to each other. And so all of their kids became some of my closest friends. And one of my coping mechanisms, so, you're in school Monday through Friday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I would hang out with my friends, those family friends who became, who are now lifelong friends. They became my core group. And that was, I guess, in some ways a coping mechanism to, be like, hey, these people look like me, they sound like me, they're also going through similar challenges as me.
That's fascinating. I've noticed, at least I came to the US over 8 years ago, and during that time, I generally saw the people that came with me from India to the US. They kind of went into two paths in terms of finding the community of friends. One group was back with the same friend group from India or people that they knew as Indians and kind of stayed with them, or other Pakistanis or Bangladeshis, in that group. Then the other group, I think I just tended to be more on that side, was people that kind of went, I want to explore completely outside of my community and kind of make the friends with everyone else, which I found to be very interesting. But since you have grown up with probably a mix of people, I mean, your neighborhood might have been people from Pakistan and like Pakistani friends, but I guess school was much more diverse. Do you now, when you're getting people together, you bring all kinds of friends together?
Yeah.
Are they all in?
So it's a good question. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to have, you know, friends and acquaintances from a very broad cross section of backgrounds and heritage and ethnicities. I think for me, yeah, we try to bring together all different types of people, but we also realize that sometimes that's not a possibility, right? Certain feel more comfortable if in one type of setting as opposed to in an open setting with everyone. We do try our best, but it really comes down to what we're looking to do and sort of who I'm with. I will say now, as I have kids and raising kids, of course my child has tons of friends. We have tons of families that we relate with, talk to. There is a core group of friends, and you know, it's people that look and sound like me. And part of the reason is because their challenges are so similar to mine. And I think that's what it comes back to is, as I'm raising a kid, I try to see like, hey, what were some of the things that were missing in my childhood and how can I make that easier for the next generation?
So, you're pretty big into community from the standpoint of you like connecting people. You like getting people together, even at your work with Techstars. You do a lot of community based work. I've noticed that people that are generally very intrigued by connecting people or are interested in that generally have some level of disconnection that happened early on, which is kind of where this need to connect people also comes. Like for me, I've noticed, at some point, even in school, I didn't feel like I fit in the group that I was around. And so now it's become sort of a core part of my identity to find unity in different ways and try to find connection points between things that don't seem to be connected. Would you say some of your curiosity or striving towards connecting and building communities comes from that?
Yeah. So I think, growing up, for me, I was part of so many different circles, and I still am. And what I try to do is like try to find the common thread in all of them and try to see if there's a way to connect and bridge, different groups of people, different types of people, see what's happening. I've always been sort of a community builder going back to my college days. At NYU, I used to do a lot of community building. Even when I got my MBA, I did a lot of community work. So for me, it's trying to find what is the common thread that brings people together. And I think it's rooted in my core belief that a world that is more connected, among different types of people, the better we'll be able to solve, bigger challenges, the better we'll be able to, live in harmony and things like that. I think what's interesting is we live in a time when there's more connection than ever, right? Like in terms of means of connecting, right? I can reach out to anyone through any of the social platforms. But in some ways, we also live in a time when there's very little harmony, right? So people are very quick to judge a book by its cover. They're very quick to have an opinion about something without really interacting or knowing why they have that opinion. And I think for me, it all comes down to understanding different types of people and sort of what's happening with them. What is their day to day, and is there a way to make things better that way?
Why do you think that's the case? The interconnectedness, but lack of harmony.
Yeah. So it's interesting when the internet came out, and this is not to get dogmatic or to have, say, but it might be a hot take. When the internet, was first made available, mass availability, so let's say mid 90s, early 2000s, and broadband came about, there were actually pockets on the internet of different communities. And I recall going back to the AOL chat days, chat room days, people used to, if you were interested in cars, there was chat rooms for all different types of cars. If your interest was in sports teams, you'd have all different sort of areas to go and find sports. And it was very thread based, sort of like a Reddit, but that was the entire internet. And I think what's happened is that two things have shifted sort of why there's so much difference in opinion and why there's so much angst and disarray. I think one is the arrival of the internet business model, the need to monetize. And that need goes against people just hanging out and having fun. And I'll get to another physical reason for that in just a second. The second reason is the rise of the algorithm, right? So you may post something online, and if it's not in my direct interest that one of these large platforms has predetermined for myself, I'm not going to see it. And that's all determined by things I'm interacting with, things I'm engaging in. And I think because of that profile algorithm, it's creating more polarity. And because our main way of interacting now is through digital means, and that polarity is pulling us away, right? So let's say I post something and someone doesn't like it. Their impression of me is going to be like, well, this person has takes that I don't agree with, so my impression is that I probably won't like this person. But there's so much more to me that they won't understand or get. To that other thing that I was mentioning, just take a look at our physical spaces. There used to be the bowling alley, there used to be the pool hall, there used to be the skating park, the arcade, places to hang out, right? And historically, these were just places to come together, build community, have a fun time. As the rise of monetization, profitization have come about and become the forefront, these places have gone away. And that also creates polarity because now I don't know my neighbors. Now I don't know the community. Now I don't know people that live in my town.
This is a trend that I've seen change within a few years, honestly. My family still lives in the same neighborhood that I was born in, basically. It's like last 20, 25 years, whatever. And I remember we knew all our neighbors. I remember like we talked to everyone. Like my grandparents would go on walks with all their neighbors. This was the norm. And over the last 4 or 5 years, every time I've gone back to India, and it's the same here. It was already here in some ways, but now it's also there in India. Is that we had new neighbors come in and we barely have any interaction with them. To your point on the digitization, but the monetization of the digital communities that are out there, do you feel like the more we're commoditizing communities online or building these interest-based algorithms, the more important physical communities will become?
Yeah, 100%. Um, Humans, our sort of genealogy and the way that we're wired is we're social animals, right? We are extremely social, and isolation breeds a lot of terrible issues as part of our psyche. It breeds loneliness, it breeds anxiety, it breeds depression. And I think one of the best cures is living and breathing community, right? So meeting in person, connecting with people. Now, for example, it's one of my top areas of interest these days is male loneliness. And male loneliness gets particularly acute and pervasive when you enter your mid to late 30s and 40s. And I am now entering 40. And, for me, what I noticed is that a lot of my dad friends didn't have a space to hang out. We didn't really talk about our emotions. We didn't get a chance to, just shoot the breeze and have fun. Um, so now we created a dad bods group in my local town and community. We add people to it every so often. It's a tight group. It's 15 people. I've been very meticulous about how we bring people in, making sure that they become part of the fabric without losing their identity. And we meet every, I'd say, 10 to 15 days. Twice a month, we meet at 9:30 p.m. Once the kids and family kind of is done with our needs, we meet at a friend's house, hang out. We have chai. Sometimes we have mitai, and it's just a way to let loose. And we joke. It's funny. It's silly. Sometimes we just discuss big things, but really, it's just a way to bring people together and have fun.
I wanna get back to the community thing in a bit, but I kind of want to go further in your journey there. So, we went through a little bit of your growing up time, but then when you chose to pursue finance, what was the thought process behind it?
Yeah, I think there were like two or three things. I will say when I went into finance, the Hollywood version would say, well, it was predetermined and it was architected to perfection. The reality is, back in 2005, 2006, when I was looking at internships, there weren't very many internships outside of finance. And part of it is the school I went to. So I went to a very finance driven school in New York City. The other thing is just the time period we were in. There was a big banking boom in '05, '06, sort of right before the crash. So just as, tech has had a boom, finance was hiring in droves. They were looking for people everywhere and anywhere. So that sort of also kind of tilted me in that direction. And then part of me was, I always enjoyed the public markets, following stocks, things of that sort. So that's sort of what guided me in that direction.
You've mentioned, I saw earlier, you mentioned your mindset on one of the platforms is equal parts analytical and creative. So when did you start? You said early on it was a lot of analytical thinking through this part of your career. When did you start exercising and why did you start exercising your creative muscle?
Yeah, and to be honest, looking back, I didn't exercise it soon enough because I was so, and this comes back to earlier in the conversation of being two types of people, right? And I was so caught up in being this finance person that I was just all analytical, right? So I was trying to understand financial models. I was trying to understand the three statements for a company and why it should exist, and not realizing that I wasn't having fun doing that, right? I wasn't being honest with myself. That's not who I am. Sure, I could maybe do those things, but is that in my heart what I want to do? No, I think it took some time to come to terms with it. After 6.5, 7 years on Wall Street, I finally then said, you know what, I'm going to go do something out on my own. And it was sort of a spur of the moment decision. I was married at the time. I discussed with my wife, and she was very supportive. I think she saw the creativity in me and how it was being inhibited by my work environment, right? You're in a cubicle, you're working, especially the banking hours, you're working somewhere, 12, 14, 15 hours a day. Um, and it drains on you. So I quit cold turkey. My parents were not a fan of that decision. And then I just started doing this basic creative stuff. I was always good at presentations, so I started becoming more artistic in my pitch decks, my presentations, and that sort of then spurred all the creativity.
I saw your presentation for Blueprint, one of the companies. Is fascinating, and I mean, seems like what Canva is doing now. It was a lot similar to that.
Yeah. Um, Blueprint, what could have been. That one, I won't say it haunts me till this day, but I still think when I look at the field of presentation makers, most of them are terrible, but maybe I'm just biased. Yeah, it's sort of what Canva's doing. It was built for marketing teams. It was trying to make the presentation process more cohesive, easier, and more than that, just have better fidelity in terms of delivery. So yeah, that was fun. I took that in house then to a venture studio, and sort of parked that on the shelf as I worked on other projects as an entrepreneur in residence. But yeah, as it goes in startup land, you need so many things in your favor. So it's not just the team, it's not just timing, it's not just network, but it's also luck. And I may have had some of those things, but I certainly didn't have all four of those things. And I think that's why that blueprint didn't become as big as it could have.
Can you influence luck?
Yeah, this is a good topic. I personally believe yes. And the reason I say that is, most of the advice that you get online is to say no, right? If you talk to people that have made it, they're like, well, you need to learn how to say no. And part of me is, I can agree with that once you've made it, right? Yes, you need to learn then how to allocate your time, figure out what's important, what's not. But in the beginning, you need to say yes. You need to say yes to all the meetings you can get. You need to say yes to all these different connections. You need to pull on every single string. And that can only happen by saying yes. And when you say yes, what happens is inevitably the surface area of who you are and what you're working on increases. And if you can increase surface area, my belief is that luck will then fall somewhere within that 2x2 plane.
No, I've really been diving deeper into, and I've recently been reading this book by Sahil Bloom called Five Types of Wealth, and
Yep.
he discusses this topic around the luck surface area and four types of luck. You can go find more into that. It's very interesting, and I do think that you can influence it by doing those things. But when you're early in this journey, when let's say you cold turkey quit, that role in investment and wanted to start something, how did you find what you wanted to start? What was the process behind that?
Yes. Another I'd say tip is that, and I think this is easier now, but back in, you know, 2008, 2009, 2010, we didn't have as many digital tools, so networking was much more difficult. So I think always be networking. And what happened was that I had personally gone through a huge physical transformation, as you can imagine, in that Wall Street sort of style life and job. I had put on tons of weight. And then I had created a simple Excel sort of spreadsheet with a few macros and formulas that allowed me to track my progress. And then I lost it. I lost 65, maybe 70 pounds. And at my highest, I was about 230. At my lowest, I was just north of 160. So that was fun, and I was really into fitness and things like that. So that was the first startup I worked on. And what I started doing was I started meeting with people, talking about my idea, sharing my solution, and there was tons of interest, and that's what led to the first company. It was called Elevate. So that's what I worked on.
What's been, if you look back, the first piece of advice that you think that really resonated with you when starting a company?
Yeah. So first piece of advice, and I still give this advice, is talk to customers. I was given this advice back in 20. So I quit my job in 2013. So I'd listened to this one podcast at the time, 2012. It was on the Lean Startup. So the Lean Startup had just come out. Eric Ries, I believe, is the author there. And he was popularizing, talking about this on all different shows. So the method of build, test, learn, in the build phase, he was talking, or in the learn phase, he was talking about how you need to talk to customers. And you need to really understand what are their needs and requirements for a product. And that always really stuck to me. I feel like now I can tell when a founder has talked to customers or not. And what you realize is founders that haven't talked or spoken to customers, their idea is very general because it's all in their head. It's basically a conception of what they think is the right solution. Founders that have done customer discovery and deep customer discovery talk about their problem with such accuracy and such detail about the actual problem that you're like, yes, this person has done the work. And that's sort of something that has always stuck out to me is keep talking to people.
What does talking to customers in the right way look like?
Yeah. So it's funny. Talking to customers means that you don't talk. So you ask very open-ended questions and you let them go and talk for as long as possible. Your goal is to maybe guide the conversation, but to not guide the answers that they give. And I think that's a key distinction. A lot of founders, a lot of people in startups try to guide the answer so that they can have some sort of confirmatory bias of what they're working on. And that is exactly the wrong way to go about customer discovery. What you need to do is to have a very open conversation, like a word cloud, and figure out how you can get what you need in that open conversation and not come in with a set of questions, be like, yeah, I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But maybe you talk about 1 and 7, and that's the entire conversation. And that's okay. But at least it's deep enough so that you really get a sense of what 1 and 7 truly are.
That's what's happening right now, by the way. And it's pretty funny because I think that applies a lot to in general podcasting, interviewing as well. I mean, that's the art of interviewing, right? Like you want to understand by just listening and not putting in your own biases into the equation as much as you can. I wanted to touch, since you're talking about interviewing really well, you had this panel that you did with Nikita Bier, uh, Nyakeo,
Yep.
and Raj Singh, and you were moderating that panel in LA. So I wanted to get, what were your lessons that you took away from that conversation? I know it's not online, but can you give us some idea of what kinds of questions you asked and what did you take away from
Yeah.
that?
So this is, and it's funny that you mentioned that what's happening here. In my belief, I think some of the best entrepreneurs are sort of scientists, right? They bring the scientific method. They're taking note of every single change and iteration and being very prescriptive about, what has happened, what hasn't happened, and then go back to the drawing board and do it again. I think in some ways, journalists, interviewers, podcasters are the same. So that conversation was with exited founders. So Nikita has sold 2 companies, one to Facebook, one to Discord. Nikeo, she sold a beauty brand to Unilever. And Raj Singh had created a sort of marketing loyalty company and then sold that to a large marketing tech company. We talked about what an exit looks like. We talked about sort of the emotional roller coaster that comes with exiting and building your company. We also talked about sort of what is your identity as a person after the exit. So for a while, 5, 6, 7, in some cases, I think 8 years, your identity was tied to this company. And now you've exited, you have no daily responsibilities as it relates to that company. Where do you go from here? How do you find the inspiration? How do you find the intuition to build something new? So we went detailed on that. And, it was a really, really intimate, great conversation. We did it in Los Angeles. We had about 150 people in attendance. And yeah, we covered everything as it relates to those areas.
Did any of them express unexpected challenges or regrets after the exit?
100%. I mean, I think all three said that, in some ways there was some regret. And regret with, the topical things that most people will think about is like, oh, we didn't get a high enough valuation when we sold. Oh, we didn't, carve out this earnout for our company. But the things that they had regret about was, losing their day-to-day teammates. All of them enjoyed working with people to achieve something great, and the regret was, well, now I have to do this again. I have to build a new tribe. I have to build a new group of people that are just as passionate about solving a problem. And That's sort of what they had regret about, was just that connection aspect between people and the mission, that they were working toward.
Was there also, and you can share as much as you want to about this, the thought going into building this company that they wanted to exit? Was that like the preconceived notion behind it?
Yeah, it's funny. They knew an exit would be in the cards, but it wasn't something that they had planned out fully, right? So that they knew, hey, we're building something, it's interesting at the beginning. Perhaps there's an exit down the line, but we're just so in love with what we're doing right now, the customer subset that we're going after, that this is our livelihood. We'll worry about the exit when it materializes and when it comes, but for now, this is our focus. Although I will say, I won't say who because I don't want to pin it on them. One person did say that you need to plan for your exit from day one. So, there is sort of difference of opinion on how to plan your exit and how to go about
This question that I have for you, this is the last one on this topic, is from some of the people in the audience who are tech bros and love Nikita Bier. So I wanna ask you this question specifically about that. What do you think is his super strength, super skill?
it. Okay, so I had cold outreach to Nikita. So I do not have an existing personal relationship. I exhausted everyone and everything in my network to get him to the table. It took several tries, and by several, I mean at least 10 to 12. So if, for your tech bro friends and colleagues, if you are selling software, if you are selling a widget, if you are selling something, just know it takes many different tries, many different attempts. With that said, I think his superpower is cutting through the BS. Plain and simple. He is super, super transparent. He is super straight to the point. He says things as they are. He does not sugarcoat. And I think part of it is obviously he's achieved a level of success and he can, come as who he is. But he's very, you know, I think it requires a level of introspection. He's not trying to fake who he is. He's not trying to sell anyone on who he is. He's just is. And just as he is, he's able to now pinpoint and cut through stuff and be like, no, that's not right. That's not how you do it, versus what you're told online or what you read online. So I think that's his extreme superpower.
A lot of the people that are, younger in their early 20s or in college, generally I've noticed tend to gravitate towards consumer-based applications and have a deeper interest in building something in that space, in the consumer space. I don't know, maybe the amount of connection you feel to the customer because it's a human, maybe in some ways, like compared to a B2B, which is more just feels like this entity that you're actually going towards. But how do you view the consumer space versus the business space with your experience in that?
Yeah, it's tough. So consumer is really hard, right? And I've seen this and observed this trend too, is that younger folks tend to build consumer applications, not B2B. I think part of it is maybe there's a shorter feedback loop in terms of getting feedback on what you're working on the consumer side as opposed to the B2B side. And the reason being in B2B, it takes a while to establish a relationship, finding someone that's going to be the champion of your service, and then getting actual feedback from that entity. On the consumer side, you could go to your friends, you could go to family, their networks, their circles, and quickly get this feedback. I think what happens though, and what I've observed is that because they're going to friends and family, no one's giving them honest feedback. Everyone's like, yeah, this is great. You should do this. And yeah, this is needed. And I would encourage those young folks to don't go one connection removed from your friends and family, go two connections removed, right? So that it is truly an unbiased opinion, so that you can get real feedback on what are the challenges, whether or not this is a product that's needed, things of that sort.
I feel the fact that you brought up that Nikita's super skill is that he is pretty unbiased is very interesting because no, I mean I guess you need unbiased opinion in both B2B and consumer, but you need more of an, in my opinion, unbiased nature towards looking at consumer based feedback because that just feels like it has more emotion in it in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, I think emotion, I think part of it is like it's more visible, right? And that visibility is what's creating the emotion. Yeah, Nikita cuts through the BS. He says it as it is. I think particularly that's why he has some hot takes on things is because He's seen it and he knows from his perspective what works and what doesn't work.
I wanted to get a little bit more into you briefly mentioned kind of working in a venture studio as well. In general, I noticed there's a lack of understanding in what an incubator, a venture studio is versus what an accelerator is. Could you kind of break that down a little bit?
Yeah. So three terms that I think often get sort of put together but have very different meanings. As you said, incubator, accelerator, and venture studio. Incubator. So think of, sort of a firm or company that has a special labs component, an innovation unit where they are building ventures in-house. So, for example, let's say you're Pepsi. Pepsi has an innovation unit. Maybe they're building some new soda company, maybe they're doing something else. That would be incubation. That is an incubator. Another type of incubator is one that works with external founders, right? So maybe there's a mission around a certain vertical, and then they're like, hey, let's incubate this idea and see where it goes. Second, accelerators. So the one that I work at, Techstars, Y Combinator, 500 Global, the list goes on. These are programs that are dedicated to investing with capital in promising young startups to help them accelerate their growth. And what this means is that maybe they have a product in market, there's some initial traction, and the accelerator, for 13 weeks or however long the duration is meant to enhance and really figure out core issues that exist with their startup so that they can then eventually get to funding and other larger customer contracts. Last but not least, venture studio. So these are typically set up by venture firms. They create a studio, and the sole purpose of the studio is to build companies in-house. They believe that they have proprietary knowledge around a certain area, a certain trend. Typically, that's derived from all of their investing activity that they're currently doing. And because of that, they want to then build ventures that they haven't seen come through their investment pipeline. And they'll then allocate resources they will hire talent, they will sort of bring in the software and services required and then try to set up these things. Typically, you have a venture builder inside of a venture studio whose responsibility is to go from basically concept stage to that first fundraise. And then usually what happens is the venture studio will then hire an executive team to then run with that company.
Thank you for that breakdown. I wanted to ask you a little bit more on how your own entrepreneurial ventures have shown up in your investing activities now. So, in terms of how you review companies that are coming to you, how has your experience kind of shaped your narrative or how you kind of
Yeah.
value them?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate. I've viewed company building and business from many different lenses, right? So you go back to Wall Street, that's probably the latest stage, right? I'm evaluating very mature companies that have financials, that have revenue, that have profits. From my founding days, that's really, the creative skill set of how do you bring a product to market? How do you actually talk to people? How do you build something of value? From my venture studio days, then I got to really understand how do you sell into an enterprise and get large customer contracts so that you can build something of significance and build with a partner. And then through the Techstars experience, I've now looked at an array of early stage pre-seed companies and try to observe sort of what works and what doesn't. And I think coming back to your question, all of these experiences sort of shape the way I look at companies, right? So for me, when I'm evaluating early stage, I want to understand whether or not this problem is real, right? And how do I determine whether it's real? I ask founders, well, show me or tell me about the customer discovery that you've done. What gives you promise and confidence that this problem exists? And once I get past that, then I try to determine, okay, well, how do you monetize? Is there a repeatable monetization strategy behind this? And then even before that is, how do you get to your customer? Do you have a pathway? Do you have a line of sight? Is there something there? So I try to bring pieces from all the different career stages that I've had into that early stage investing piece because I think for me at least, that's the best way to serve founders is, hey, look, this is where you're at today, but eventually you're going to have to bring metrics and things like that because that's what the public markets want. So yeah, try to pull threads from all different parts of the career and eventually try to make that into something that makes sense for where the founders are at.
Is there any counterintuitive insight you've gained about at that early of a stage when you're investing in pre-seed founders about what to look for within founders?
Yeah, so I think the counterintuitive, and this is what I dislike about the venture industry, is someone who can pitch well can raise capital. And, that's unfortunate. So the counterintuitive, so the typical advice is if someone can pitch well, that means that they're building a worthy business, right? That they know what they're talking about, they know how to sell, they can build a legitimate business. And there are too many examples of two guys with a pitch deck who go out and fundraise even though they don't have a product. I think the counterintuitive advice is to say that, well, try to understand what is the problem, try to understand the founders, who they are as people, what they've achieved, and then make a determination of whether or not this is an investable company. As simple as that sounds, you'd be surprised by how many people in venture do not do that.
Yeah, how can one discern better from your viewpoint?
Yeah, so I think it's like first, you just need reps, right? So repetitions into investing, into looking at companies. For example, last year, I looked at 4,000 companies and I spoke to 1,000 entrepreneurs. So 4,000 people I interacted with in digital means, LinkedIn, Twitter DMs, email, etc. And then of those 4,000, I took 1,000 meetings. So I typically meet anywhere from 2 to 5 entrepreneurs a day,
Wow.
just getting to know their business. And I think why I go after such a large volume is because I want to understand, yes, I want to understand how people are communicating about the problem that they're solving, but I also need to understand what are the problems that people are solving out there. Are these interesting problems? And then I go back to my network of mentors, of product specialists, of experts, and try to see, this is what I'm seeing. Tell me about some of the problems that you're seeing in the marketplace. And then I try to conjoin those two and find, where are the investable things that I should go after? Or where are the synergies that make sense for investing?
Is there any recent example of a company or an idea that you saw that was very non-traditional, did not have any trends particularly associated with it, or it was just new in the problem that it's solving? And then how did you kind of go about discerning if that's a decent thing to invest in?
Yeah. So I think investing also is determined, the type of investing that you do is determined by the stage you're investing at. So if you're investing at pre-seed, it's all predominantly about the team, right? Don't even care about a little bit about the product, but it is team, team, team. If I'm investing at seed, it's a combination of team and product. If it's at Series A, then I care about the product and the monetization. If I'm at Series B, I'm caring about monetization and then market, right? So can this expand over time? So for me, looking at it from that lens, I invest in team, right? I need to see entrepreneurial hustle. I need to see, can this person be resourceful enough and find the way to connect the dots? So as for a particular example, I had met a company working in sort of small inventory loans for businesses in Latin America. And I met this company a year and a half ago. They were on their path to doing about $1 million in revenue at that time. And the feedback I'd given them was, hey, I kind of like your business. I like you. But I don't know if this is sustainable because they were going after businesses, bakeries in Latin America. And I was like, I think that's too narrow, right? I don't think there are enough bakeries to sustain a business here, especially a venture-backed one. They took that feedback to heart. They blew up the business and did a hard pivot, went after, now they're building sort of an AI agent that determines loan flexibility and sort of the giving and taking of loans for small, medium businesses. And they're targeting Latin America still, but now that expands the scope. They're in the early phases, and we invested in that company. And the reason we invested was the CEO managed a $300 million business previously. The COO was one of the general managers and head of Wish.com for Latin America. So we just felt like the team had the components to figure out that market, but more importantly, to be resourceful enough because they had done it in their career so many times. And that's what gave us confidence then.
That's a very interesting example. And to kind of piggyback off of that, um, Latin America is one market that's obviously growing a lot, and then we have Asia as a market that's growing a lot. We've talked a little bit about this in our previous call, but I kind of wanted to dive a little bit into what are some gaps you see in the way founders are thinking in these areas in Asia about a company building. What are your thoughts on that in general? Where is the gap there? What are the opportunities you see?
Yeah. So I think the West, and by West, I mean the United States, Western Europe, and United States, maybe not all of North America, but maybe US and Canada. What I've seen is that, they had to go through the industrial age, they had to go through the information age, and now they're getting to, the automated AI age. Whereas regions such as, the MENA region, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, they're going straight from industrial to the AI age. They don't need the information age because for them, there's no reason to go into any of those flows. So the problems that they're solving are much more apparent. There's a lot of digitization happening in those areas. So they're connecting people to smartphones, to digital devices, things of that sort. And therefore, it's making the problems more meaningful. The solutions are more meaningful. And when you bring on, and I think what's underpinning is all of this is that the population sizes of all these countries are not in the tens of millions, but in the hundreds of millions. And in India's case, it's in the billions. When you look at that and you can and then try to understand the scale that a product or a solution can have, it makes it that much more impactful. And I think that is the lens by which I'm seeing entrepreneurs solve problems across the globe. A big focus on fintech, a big focus on sort of consumer SaaS, what I would say is prosumer. So the US experienced this maybe a decade ago with the rise of, Airtables and, the fancy applications to do more work, better work. I think I'm starting to see that a little bit in Latin America, most certainly in MENA, a little bit in Southeast Asia. So yeah, I think we're seeing all of that. We're seeing that trend come about, but instead of building an Airtable, they're now building the AI version of that relates to today and tomorrow. And it's going to have that much, instead of having 2x impact, it's going to have 10x impact. And now I try to compartmentalize that with the population, and you're like, wow, they're really onto something. The other thing, I talk to entrepreneurs around the globe, and what you come to realize is that talent is equally distributed. You can find some of the most talented people in every bit and part of the world, right? You can find them in Nigeria, you can find them in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, you can find them in Thailand, you can find them in Vietnam. What is not equally distributed is opportunity. And what I think where entrepreneurs need to focus on, especially in those emerging markets, is how do I tell and sell my story in a way that appeals to these larger, more established markets so that we can get the proper spotlight, the proper funding, the proper resources.
So opportunities are not equal, but in some ways the resources for some of these to build some of these things are close enough to build. It's more about how do you go about positioning yourself in the global market.
Yeah. Positioning is key. And I think, when I relate to, especially, relating to like sort of a Desi perspective, we have some of the smartest people in the world, right? Like we're like the best in math, and now obviously in science, with all the success that ISRO's having and the Indian space economy. We can't communicate, right? Where are the people with the arts? Where are the people with that know how to tell a story? We also need that component as well. And I think this comes back to just and not to make this just on Desis as a whole, immigrants in the States shied away from humanities, from, sort of the social sciences. And, you know, it's great that we have the core skill set, but that's not enough. We need to learn how to tell stories. We need to know how to be creative in telling those stories, so that people can understand them, learn from them, and then eventually care for them.
Last question for you here on the topic of some guidance for aspiring entrepreneurs. So whenever I go back to India or I'm here on campus at UT Austin, I come across a lot of student founders or people that are wanting to start something. I've noticed that there's generally a much stronger need for finding purposeful work. That is not just a you're getting money for it, just a job, but work that is more purposeful. So what is some advice you would give to help them navigate this world we're entering now, where it seems to be that there's, people always come across layoffs, people come across AI taking over specific roles, or the thought of it, even if it's not happened yet. How would you kind of go about navigating that if you're
Yeah.
young right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it might be a multi-part answer, if that's okay.
Of course.
I think one is spend time with yourself. I think if I look back to when I was in college, 18, 19, 20, 21, I didn't spend enough time getting to know who I was. What were my core interests? Why do I think the way that I think? Why do I view this as the way it is? And I think that requires a lot of introspection. Something I wish I had done sooner. Be introspective. That is first and foremost. The reason for that is that introspection is going to give you signal on which direction, which passion, which path to go down. A lot of people you'll read say, well, you should work on something that you're passionate about. And I say BS. That's not true. Passion eventually it's fleeting. It runs out. What you need to work on, or what you should work on, is something that is inherent to you, something that is uniquely you. And the only way you're going to figure out what is uniquely you is if you spend time with yourself, getting to know yourself. So that's the first part of it. Second part of it is don't get caught up in the hype. Today it was AI. 7 years ago it was SaaS. Build anything that's software as a service, and that's that. And now what you're realizing is that AI is going to disrupt, maybe, I think there's some reports out there, 80% of SaaS companies out there. They won't exist in the next 3 to 5 years. So don't get caught up in the hype. And the last thing, especially when you're young, and I was like this too, I didn't share my idea with other people. And you're worried someone's going to steal your idea, they're going to run away with it and work on it. There's so much for people to care and work on. This is known as the spotlight effect. It takes an inordinate amount of success, luck, happenstance for a startup idea to take off. For you to think that someone's just going to take and run away with your idea, I have yet to see it happen. Of course, there are instances, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it would be very, very difficult to do that. So talk about your idea, share your idea. It's only going to make you better at communicating your idea and get a sense for what you're working on. So those are the three things I'd say that immediately come to mind.
Fantastic advice, honestly. And something that I have noticed, at least in myself, is that introspection without judgment is important, because you can go like, okay, I'm inherently interested in toys. That's something that I have a passion for. But then you go like, everyone else thinks toys are stupid, and so you have this judgment attached to these interests that you have that need to be separated from what you just feel like you're inherently like and who you are. So I would
Yeah,
add that.
absolutely. Be kind to yourself, right? Like, and maybe that's like a nice place to end is the world is a mean place. And by mean, I mean it's meant to say no to you at every which way, right? And the the best entrepreneurs, throughout history, throughout time, the best change makers, politically, socially, the best scientists were the ones that didn't befall to the nose. They pushed through. They said, okay, well, that's just your opinion. I'm going to continue working through. If any of the people of significance, Edison, Aristotle, go back in history, even if you go to some of the political movements, whether, relating to South Asia, right? So whether it was Jinnah or Gandhi or anyone else throughout the history of time, Martin Luther King, and if they just said no, there would be no progress. But you have to work against that. And I think part of that is what you're related to is be kind to yourself. Don't take other people's judgments so seriously, because at the end of the day, they don't know much better than you.
Thank you so much, Emma. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you.